Welcome to episode 24 of the Selling Your Screenplay Podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm going to be interviewing screenwriter Chris Sparling. In 2009, Chris sold a spec script called Buried. It was produced in 2010, starring Ryan Reynolds. It literally takes place entirely in a coffin as the main character tries to escape. This script is talked about a lot in Hollywood. You literally can't get any more simple in terms of cast and locations. Chris and I talk extensively about Buried, how he wrote it, and how he got it sold, so stay tuned for that. I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, Screencraft. Screencraft is dedicated to helping screenwriters master the craft of screenwriting and succeed in the business of Hollywood. Sign up for free education and inspiration at screencraft.org. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word, so thank you very much for those who have done that. I'd like to thank Final Fenway Fiction and Fink Sinatra, who gave me a nice retweet on last week's episode. I'd also like to thank Thomas Ryan, Ginger Shine, and Tofu Princess, who left me some incredibly nice comments over on YouTube. Thanks, as always, for those. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing screenwriter Chris Sparling. Here is the interview. Welcome, Chris, to the Selling Your Screenplay Podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So I thought it might be interesting to start with Buried and try and work backwards from there. Can you tell us how Buried sort of came about? Really, what was the genesis of that script and how did it make it into becoming the movie that it did?
All right. So Buried was, it started off, I wanted to make a feature that I wanted to direct. And I didn't really have any money to make one. So, just from things I'd done in the past, other projects I'd worked on, so on and so forth, I realized the importance of scale. And I knew at the time, I was like, well, working a normal job, not making very much money doing it, I just said, I could probably put aside about $5,000 comfortably and not disrupt my whole friggin' life. So I just said, well, what feature can I afford to make for $5,000? And so naturally it had to be a few locations, it had to be a few actors and everything else, and I just scaled it down further and further until I was left with a guy buried alive for 90 minutes, one guy for the whole movie. Excuse me. And that was all well and good. That's one thing to say, hey, that's what I plan on doing. I don't think it's ever been done, and you kind of go through this little victory dance for about 10 minutes because you think you have something unique, and I guess I did, but still you have to make the movie, you have to write the script. So I decided, I had to come up with the reason why. Like, why is this guy buried alive? And so I had done some research on, people being taken hostage, places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And naturally, when these people were taken hostage, they weren't kept in very good situations. They were just kept in very small rooms or whatever the case may be. And these were these contractors, not necessarily soldiers, just guys delivering machine parts, guys delivering kitchen supplies, right? Just truck drivers. And so I found out that there's a pretty common business out there, the kidnapping and ransom business. So I kind of married that piece of truth with my fiction and said, all right, well, my guy's going to be taken hostage and buried alive. And we're going to meet him when he's already buried alive, and he's going to, well, I'm not going to say, because I don't want to spoil the movie.
Yeah. So, one thing that like occurs to me, and I totally think it was a very unique concept. And I mean, I've been in meetings with producers, and it's like it's become sort of a baseline for. I mean, it gets mentioned because of it was sort of unique, and there's literally nowhere to go from that. I mean, you can't get any more contained, literally.
Right. The only you can get you can basically just get a smaller person and a smaller.
Yeah, smaller persons.
That's
and so,
the only thing.
When you had this idea, were you somewhat worried that you would not be able to keep it entertaining for whatever, 80, 85 minutes, 90 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, naturally, I showed the script to several people, and they had concerns. They couldn't really wrap their head around how this would be entertaining for a full movie. Even if the story on the page is compelling, you're still kind of doing what you do with a novel. You fill in the blanks in your head. The mental image is there, the movie is there. And people were having a tough time understanding how, when you're presented with that imagery, how that was going to remain compelling. And I mean, and the reality is, I mean, I like to think that had I directed the film, it would have been compelling. It would have been fun to watch, and hopefully it would have been. But the fact is, it turned out to be probably better with the director who did it, and that was, and Rodrigo, who directed it, is great.
Yeah, yeah. Were you ever tempted to just have cuts out of it? Because when I first heard about this premise, I was like, well, it couldn't all be in the coffin.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be some cuts. And then I watched it. I was like, no, it's all in the coffin. Were you ever tempted just because it wouldn't have been that hard to cut to some of these phone conversations? The bureaucrat in the office, the girlfriend in an apartment or a house. That wouldn't have been expensive to do.
No, it would have. That's exactly. Well, it wouldn't have been once. The budget became what it became. But when the budget was $5,000, there was no opportunity to do that stuff, because then I would have to cast these actors, I would have to secure these locations. It just would take on a whole new life, because he speaks to so many people. But the other side of it, too, was that I knew that if it could stay there for the whole movie, it was going to be unique. I had never heard of a movie like that. I mean, people refer to movies where you have people isolated or whatever the case may be, even if it's just one actor, there's still the world around them for them to look at. I had never heard about one guy buried alive by himself for a whole movie, and that's the only place we stayed. So the urge to cut away was never mine. It was when the script took on a new life, and it was gonna, and I went out with it as a spec instead. Then people that were interested, and production companies that were interested, they were the ones that were suggesting, what if we cut here and cut this and change that, change this, cut to this person. And thankfully it landed with a producer that didn't want to do that. They wanted to do it wasn't.
So what was your plan if you had shot this thing for $5,000? What was your plan with it? Take it to film festivals?
Yeah.
Did you know distributors? What was your plan to do?
No, I mean, look, my thing is, I started as an actor years ago, and I started writing to kind of support my acting. And then what happened was, when I moved back east, I was living in Los Angeles while I was acting. When I moved back east, there really wasn't much film or TV acting to be done, so the closest thing I can do to stay a part of that industry, was to continue writing. And so the change for me, the focus became more writing driven, and then, as it's become now, is to also direct. There's actually lost track of your question. I'm sorry.
Well, I just was wondering what you're going to do, what you were planning on doing with this $5,000 feature.
Yeah.
I mean, did you have a background, some sort of a background in distribution, in sort of the commercial aspects of selling a film?
No, I didn't have anything. I didn't have the uncle in the business. I didn't have the. My dad was an iron worker. My mom was a school teacher. I mean, that's my world. Like, all my friends' families, that's the sort of jobs they had too. So, I was just going to do what I could do. I could just make my contacts, the one I've tried, the ones I made over the years, just reaching out to people with scripts I'd written and everything else, the few doors that I managed to open. I was just going to blast the town with the movie, and that was the intention. I had, obviously tried to do the festival route, all of those things, but I had no real direct roads anywhere.
So I quickly glanced at on IMDb, A Newsy at the Alamo and Balanced, and at least looking at the synopsises of those, they look like they were very weighty dramas. Did you have a sense that a contained thriller would be a more commercial script, or just it was what interested you at the time?
No, I mean, the contained thriller, I'll back up. Those two movies for me were basically my film school. I mean, I didn't go to film school. I have my degrees in criminal justice. That's kind of, I thought, career-wise, where I might be heading if the film thing didn't work out. So the films that I made, those two movies were really just they were amateurs, really. I mean, they were some, it was a learning thing for me. It was just kind of teaching myself how to do this with those movies, and not using really many professionals on either side of the camera. So when it came to do this movie, I knew it was going to kind of be a similar situation. If I was going to make my $5,000 version of it, it would be me and probably maybe 3 other people in the production team, and then my one actor. So it wasn't a matter of that stuff informing this movie. The only way it did, in a major way, was I learned the lessons from those movies about what not to do, and that was in terms of the size and scope of those films. I mean, I tried with the Newsy at the Alamo in particular. I mean, that's like a dark comedy. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea. I mean, I had so many actors, I had so many locations, and I had like no money to make it with, and so I knew with this movie with Buried, it couldn't be that. That's all I knew.
So did you have, at this point when you're starting off with Buried, did you have like the technical chops to shoot it and edit it, or were you getting friends to do that stuff?
I definitely didn't have the chops to edit it. I still don't. I mean, I don't even know how to work Final Cut or Avid. It was, as far as I had the cinematic vision for it. I had I think as a writer, that kind of is part and parcel of what you do is you create these cinematic ideas in your head, and then you put them to paper, right? You commit them to your keyboard, I guess, or to your screen. So to me, I was never daunted by that idea to direct something that I wrote in particular. So I mean, to take on that as a director, I wasn't in any way intimidated by that challenge. But as far as who would have edited it, I would have had, that's a tough word to say, edited it. I would have had to find someone to do it.
Okay. At this point, too, I think I read in another interview that you wrote, you figured 7, 8, 9 scripts or something came before this one. Had you started to write some other thrillers, or were you just writing all over the board? Because as I said, it didn't seem like Uzi at the Alamo or Balance were at all thrillers. Had you written some thrillers when you wrote Buried?
No. Actually, that was the first thriller. I was writing comedies before that.
Okay.
The one, like, the piece that I kind of left out was the person who's now my manager. So now, when I made a Newsy at the Alamo, I didn't know anyone, and I kind of just blasted, I went through whatever books existed at the time, the Hollywood Creative Directory or Representation Directory, and just started sending it out, just asking people if I could send you my film, looking for representation, so on and so forth. Very few people
now,
responded.
your query letter is you're looking for representation as a director and an actor and a writer?
It was more like, I'm just, at that point, I think I didn't just blindly send these things out. I researched who these people were, what kind of talent they represented, whether it be just literary or just directors, so on and so forth. So I usually tailored it to who I was sending it to. And for me, I did everything on that movie save making the food, So I was kind of saying, what if you see any shining moment in any facets of these things, maybe we can talk. So I got a small response, and I sent my amateurish movie that I was proud of, and thankfully I did hear back from someone that said, I liked it. It made me laugh. What else are you working on? And so that person, Aaron Kaplan, is someone that I made sure that I kept in touch with for, honestly, I think for 3 or 4 or 5 more years after that. So every time I would finish a new script, I would make sure I contacted him and said, hey man, I finished another script. I'd love for you to take a look at it if you don't mind. If you have time, and because he had already seen something of mine, he was willing to, and so that relationship went on that way for like 3 or 4 years, and because at least, honestly, because my stuff was at least good enough for him to not just say, look, I've read 1 or 2 things, it's just not for me, and so it was kind of like, hey, I liked it, it's not quite right for me right now, let's keep in touch, and so that's what I did, occasionally dropping emails once in a while, hey, just checking in, And so then when Buried came about, I was like 4 or 5 months into figuring out how I was going to make my $5,000 version of Buried, and I didn't send him that script. That was the only script of mine that I'd never sent to him, because at the time I was thinking, well, I mean, I have this movie about a guy buried alive for the whole movie, and he's this, this Hollywood manager and producer. Like, why would he care about my little movie? I'm not gonna ruin the relationship, right? By sending him the script he's gonna have no interest in. And then I don't know. I think I must have had like a Jerry Maguire sort of moment where I just said, to hell with it. I don't care. I don't know what's going on with my career or my life. I'm just going to send it, and whatever happens, happens. And I sent it to him, and 2 days later I heard from him, and he just was like, he flipped for it. He's like, oh my God, like, what are you doing with this script? What is the plan? And so I said, I'm going to direct it, and so we talked, and he's like, look, obviously, A, I'd love to represent you, and B, would you be willing to go out with this as a spec script? And without you directing, though. And I was like, yeah, of course I would. Are you kidding? And really, it started from there. And then it just, I got my agent after that, and then the script went out. And then, honestly, I think, as crazy as it sounds, the script went out in like March of 2009, and the movie premiered at Sundance 2010.
Yeah, that's a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back to this approach that you have. You have your first film, Uzi at the Alamo. You start sending out query letters. I like to dig into the nuts and bolts and give some people sort of an idea of scale. How many query letters do you think you sent out? And from those query letters, how many videos did people actually request? Just ballpark.
I don't even remember at this time, but I sent a lot. I mean,
Are we talking 100? Are we talking 25?
Yeah, maybe anywhere. I'd say closer to probably like 75, if I remember correctly. I mean, again, they were very targeted. It wasn't just this random, let me just send out letters to whom it may concern, to whom it may concern. None of that. It was, I took the time to know who I was talking to or trying to talk to, and, learn the kind of stuff that they were developing or whatever the case may be, or clients that they worked with, and that's who I targeted.
Okay, and then, so how many of these 75 letters, how many videos would you say actually you got a request from?
Not many. I would say maybe 5. Maybe. 5. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So, and then from that, the filter, it keeps filtering down. Yeah. And so you had this relationship. Aaron Kaplan watched it, thought it was good enough to stay in touch. Were there any other people that also liked Uzi at the Alamo, and so that you were staying in touch with as well?
Yeah. There was one other management company that liked it well enough, and it just never worked out. But they at least responded and said we liked it, and we just tried to talk a little more, and then it just fizzled out. Their interest was not as I guess. I mean, it was real, but it just wasn't that high.
Yeah. But it was the same relationship. You'd finish a script, you'd send it to them, and eventually they just stopped responding. So it petered away type of thing.
I think so.
Okay. Were there other people like Aaron Kaplan that you had relationships with? And I think would get to the heart of that. When you sent Aaron the script for Buried, how many other people did you send at it that were sort of the same sort of relationship?
Very, very few. He was one of only a few people. You could say I opened up a door for myself. He was kind of one of the few. And, the other people I remember giving it to were kind of smaller, local people, people that are, again, I didn't have anything. I didn't have a company surrounding me. I didn't have anything, I just had my ambition, really. So, I shared it with some people that might have been able to provide me with production services if they liked the project and stuff like that. But that was really it.
Okay, so let's take a dive into Uzi at the Alamo. One of the things I get a lot of questions from people that have written a script, and they're like, hey, I want to produce it myself. And one of the things I always try and impress upon people is, precisely your story is that, you're probably going to make your first film or two, and seemingly it's not going to go anywhere, but it's not a bad first step. Mm-hmm. You can learn a lot, and as you say, you actually were able to get a good contact, even though in Uzi at the Alamo, in and of itself, was not on the surface a success. It did kind of get you started. So let's talk a bit about that. What was that movie about? How did you write that script, come up with that idea? And
I'm just laughing because this is like so far in my rearview mirror. This sort of stuff. It's like, holy shit. This is like looking at this movie. And I don't mean it in any negative way, because I think a lot of people invested a lot of time, and I to this day appreciate everything they did. But truth be told, it's kind of like looking at your high school yearbook picture. You're kind of like, oh Christ, you look back at it and you just kind of, want to just hide a little bit, but it served. I don't discount the purpose that it served. I mean, I needed to learn how to do this, and even as a writer, it wasn't until I made that I actually start to learn the craft of writing, or at least figure it out, because you saw it go from the page to the screen, what you wrote, and you started to understand how these things actually translate. How something you think is clever and cute that you wrote on the page, and all of a sudden it actually becomes something you shoot, and it doesn't come across that way. It comes across as very just performance-based and very just false, right? And so, so that, that was back in, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago by this point.
Yeah. So, I think on IMDb it listed the budget at $20,000. Was that even remotely accurate?
That was like on the higher end of what it actually was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you raise the $20,000?
I had a friend of mine that was doing fairly well with business, and he believed in me. We grew up together, and I had a little bit of money from working, and then a little bit more from like just my parents, but little. I mean, all told, we're talking about like $18,000 to make a feature that had, as I said, if you look at the cast, I mean, there's so many people in the movie. There's so many locations. And again, if you don't go to film school, you don't know that. If you've never made a film and no one's really told you that before, and I did my best to do my due diligence to reading and everything else. But again, I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have anyone to tell me really any differently. I just had, my like I said, the ambition to actually do it, come hell or high water. And so that's why I say to this day I'm proud of it, because I did it. I mean, it is what it is, but I did it. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you now.
Yeah. So, did you take it out to film festivals once you got done? Submit it to film festivals, and can you give us some basic, maybe some stats on that? How many film festivals did you submit to? How many did you get into? I
remember submitting it to quite a few. Again, I mean, at the time I didn't have really any money, so like submitting it was like $50 a pop or $25 a pop, and you can, after a while, you're like, I just don't have the money anymore to keep doing this. It played a few. It played, I want to say like 4 or 5. It somehow, some way, it ended up on Netflix for a while, and then it was on like HBO Europe for a while. I don't know how, but it was.
You must have found some You must have found a distributor.
I did get a distributor. Yeah, and it was a lousy distributor, and it was kind of like the kind of distributor that the books tell you about, these predatory distributors, and it was one of those. And again, lesson learned, hard, but again, I mean, it's all these things that you take your hits and you get up and you do it again. But you see the hit coming next time, so you don't.
Yeah. And just to define that a little bit, what you're saying is it did get some distribution. It was on certain places, but you never saw any money from these distributors. Is what you're saying? Yeah. That's the kind of the classic story.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, I saw accounting statements that showed profit eventually, and still. It was very little profit, but it was amazing. I was like, yeah, that's actually a little bit of profit. And then it became just a pointless sort of thing to try to get the money after a while.
So let's just take a quick going over Balance. You produced a feature, and then you went and produced this short, Balance. Do you feel like that, again, it was just maybe a stepping stone? Do you feel like that was worthwhile to do a short?
Yeah, it was. The thing what Balance was is that I took the lessons directly from News at the Alamo and said, all right, I want to make a very spare movie. Not much dialogue, very few people, and really, really stripped down. And that's what that movie was. That movie taught me a lot in terms of the importance of silence in a film. And I don't mean just silence, just boring silence. I mean just how you can build mystery out of silence, where people are doing things, but they're clearly doing something with purpose. And you're not telling the audience exactly what it is or where it's leading to. So just I learned that lesson from making that movie, how important that is in any film. So to me, I wanted to make, I think what had happened is I'd done 1 day of reshoots on a Newsy at the Alamo, and I had a crew of like 3 people or 2 people, and I said to myself, I was like, why didn't I do the whole movie like this? I mean, I could have. It didn't look any different than the other scenes. So that's what it was for Balance. I was like, well, I'll just make a short. I just get like 2 or 3 people and make a short for like $800. And this, and mind you, this is the other thing, is that these movies, I'm talking about 10 years ago or so. So this was when, I think $20,000 now, or $18,000, whatever it was goes a lot further now because the technology supports that. Back then, it wasn't as easy. Things cost more to make them look better. These days, I mean, you can do stuff on your iPhone that you couldn't do then. So that's why, yeah.
Did you send out balance? Did you do the same sort of approach? Obviously, you sent it to Aaron Kaplan. Did you do another query blast with it?
I think so, yeah. I did. I submitted it to some festivals. I played at a few festivals. Won a small award at one or two small festivals. But again, it was a learning thing for me, and I knew that. And that's why when I set out to make A New Day at the Alamo, when I set out to make Buried, it was, I wanted to make a splash. I knew, I think you come to a point in your, not just your career, but your life, where you look and say, where am I? Where is this, how does this work finally? And I knew I was kind of nearing a point in my life too, where I was like, all right, I need something to break. I need to be at least at this point soon. And that's what it was for me. I was saying, I don't want to just make another movie that plays another small, like, bundle of festivals and people kind of golf clap and that's the end of it. I would need something that's going to make a splash. I need it. And so that's kind of that imperative just imperative is what drove me to that.
So let's take a step back even further, further in your rear view mirror. So, am I understanding this? At some point, you moved to LA, because you said you moved back to the East Coast. When were you in LA, and when did you finally first arrive in LA?
So I was in LA for a total of 2 years. So I moved there when I was 20. Lived there for a year and 8 months. Moved home to finish my undergraduate degree. Finished that. The following summer, after that, drove cross country back to LA. Arrived in LA on September 10th, 2001. So naturally the next day was 9/11. And it was just crazy. The world was crazy, but LA was also crazy. And the thing was, it was right after that too. I don't know why, a lot of people forget about this, but the anthrax scare also happened. So for like 4 months, there wasn't anything happening acting-wise. The number of auditions I went on I could count them on one hand, I think, because no one was opening mail because of the anthrax scare. And, at the time, this was before digital, everything really, so you still sent out hard copy headshots. And I just said to myself, I'm like, what am I doing? I just graduated college, I went through all that, and now I'm here again, and it's actually worse for me than when I left. It's tougher than when I left. And I just kind of resolved to say, I'm going to do this my own way, and I'm going to move home and I'm going to make a movie.
Okay, so then you moved back, and where is home?
Rhode Island.
Okay, so you moved back to Rhode Island, and that's where you actually made Uzi at the Alamo and Balance?
Yeah, I made Uzi at the Alamo there. Then I did my graduate studies with that, and then I did Balance. And then after that, I met the woman that's now my wife, and we were together, and I was deciding what I was going to do, and I wanted to do another feature, but, life was kind of moving at a different pace now, and in a different way. And so, I don't know, like I said, it just felt this really strong need to finally get my career really, really going. It kind of felt a sense of like a clock ticking. Not that she did it at all, it just internally.
Mm-hmm. So you moved back to LA at that point?
No, I didn't. No, I stayed on the East Coast, yeah.
Okay. So this relationship then with Aaron Kaplan was purely through email and perhaps telephone, but you actually never met him until you had...
Oh, I met him once. I'd gone out to L.A., I forgot what reason, but it might have been actually related to meeting with I met with the distributor of News at the Alamo.
Okay.
That was before all the thing where they didn't give me my money and all that stuff. And while I was there, I'd been in touch with Aaron a few times by this point, and we had a pretty decent rapport by email, and I think we spoke on the phone once or twice. And I just requested just a general meeting, if he'd be willing to do that, and he was nice enough to do it. And so we sat down. So I met him. I actually did meet him once before he ended up signing me years later.
Mm-hmm. So what were you doing just as a normal job back in Rhode Island?
So a variety of different things. Over the years, between working construction with my dad. I was an insurance adjuster for a while. I worked for the YMCA as a program director for a while. Let me see what else. And then I told you my background in criminal justice, so I did investigations for a while. That was actually the last job I did, like non-writing job, was working in investigations, and I was just like, see it. And thankfully, I haven't gone back to any of that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump then more to the present. You just directed a feature film, the Atticus Institute. Let's talk a little bit about that. One of the things I think you did that was really smart was by directing even some of these very low budget films, Uzi the Alamo and Balance, I think you set yourself up as people saying, well, he's a writer and director. And as you say, you probably wouldn't want to show any of these people those movies, but at least they are credentials. And so I'm sure it was easier. Can you kind of speak to that, forming your career, and how did you get in to be the director of a big feature when you hadn't directed a big feature before?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. It's a big feature in terms of what I took on, but in terms of budget, that's still a small budget film. It's just it's just light years apart from what I'd done previously, with the Uzi the Alamo and Balance. In a way, they didn't help me. If anything, I kind of preferred that people didn't even consider them. And it's only because, like I said, with those films, it was me and a lot of just local people who thought it'd be fun to kind of do this, mixed in with a few people that had a little bit of professional experience. Versus now with the Atticus Institute, I was surrounded by professionals, people with so much more experience than I ever had on set. Mm-hmm. So that's what the major difference was, and how that happened was that, I mean, it's just like anything else. If you can prove yourself, which to this point I think I had as a writer, then if it's something you want to explore, and if it's something that you can prove you have the ability to do just by virtue of how you're able to express your vision for something, those opportunities present themselves. And it's this too. It is all about the contacts you make. I didn't have any contacts all those years. Now I have tons of contacts. Once because I've made that break, and now to me, it's like, why would I not try to take advantage of the fact that I've met all of these people, and all of these people, that I either worked with or might work with, or, want to work with, or want to work with me. To me, I'm just looking at it as, it took forever just to crack the door open to get into the party. Now there's no way I'm leaving. I'm just going to be the guy that you're never kicking out. So it's, I think that's a big part of it, is that you have to be. It's weird. I don't know. I hear writers a lot of times. Not that I hang around with writers, because I'm in Rhode Island. I'm probably one of the few screenwriters that does it professionally. Anyway, here, talking about, I like to procrastinate. I don't like to. I try to do anything I can not to write and everything. And I'm like, why? Why would you do that? I don't understand. You want to do this, right? And you want to do this professionally, and what happens if you write something and it's bad? Who cares? It's not like you're operating on a patient, and the patient might die if you screw up. Who cares? Why would you do anything but what you want to do? And that is right. And so I think, having had that mentality all these years, and writing for basically no immediate reason, just to write a script and show it to a handful of people, like Aaron and maybe 2 other people, and then go, all right, well, that's that. I'll put that one on the shelf, and then just sit down and start writing the next one. Mm-hmm. I think having done that, it taught me at least a discipline of, all right, well, now that I do have opportunities, I'm just going to keep with that. That's how I'm going to operate now. Only now my scripts will always be ready.
Yeah. So give us the quick pitch of the Atticus Institute. What's it about, and when can we see it?
So the Atticus Institute is about. It takes place in present day, with people reflecting on what took place in 1976. Okay, and in this small parapsychology lab that tested people for things like telekinesis and ESP. There was a test subject that came in, this woman that just tested off the charts with everything. And what these people came to realize is that, A, it was above their pay grade to be able to try to understand her. They came to understand or believe that there was something darker going on here. The source of her powers was something darker. So the military is essentially the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense is called in to help out, and they determine this woman is possessed. So now we see that the government is taking control of the situation and taking control of this woman, and in effect, attempting to weaponize this demon.
I see. And when is it going to be finished, and when will we get to see it?
It's done. The movie's done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It just finished about a month and a half ago, and we have our international distribution lined up. that's just being finalized now, and then we are screening for distributors right after camp for domestic.
I see. Perfect. So give us a little rundown on Sea of Trees with Gus Van Sant. He's obviously a filmmaking legend.
Yeah. So that is another big project that I'm excited about. It's so there's it's a spec script that I wrote about 2 years ago by this point, and it was one of those scripts that my agent wasn't necessarily thrilled when I told him about what I wanted to write on spec, and he's like, "But look, if you've got to get it out of your system, go ahead." And I did. It was one of those things that I just really felt, strongly about. And so I wrote it, and thankfully the response has been really strong for the script, and attached Matthew McConaughey to it and Gus Van Sant to direct, and I'm on board to executive produce.
Nice. What's the sort of the pitch on that one?
So the pitch is about a guy that this man that's distraught after his wife dies. And he goes to this place in Japan called the Sea of Trees, which is this really strange forest in Japan where there are about 100 or so suicides every year. And some people, this is a very strange thing. People go from, mostly from Japan, but all from around the world to go kill themselves in this forest, and compelled to do so for whatever reason. And so he goes there to do that, and while he's about to do that, he ends up encountering this Japanese man that's there, and the Japanese man was there for that same reason. He's attempting to kill himself, but he's changed his mind, and now he's in this forest and he can't find his way out, and he's dying. He's freezing to death in this forest. And so McConaughey's character basically, it's the journey of the two of them as McConaughey's trying to help this man out of the forest, and naturally kind of undergoes his own spiritual journey in the process.
Interesting. So is there some basis on truth to this? Like the Sea of Trees actually exists, and then you fictionalize sort of a story around this truth?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the only, it's like the seed of it all is a place. There's no other part of it.
Sure.
It's not based on anything. So yeah, that's a real place.
So I'm curious, how many, now that you're kind of established as a screenwriter, what do you find your percentage of work is? Because I am actually surprised to hear that Sea of Trees was a spec. Do you find that you're working still mostly on specs, or are you getting a lot of rewriting work and working on studio stuff?
Both. To me, I'll always write specs because they were just, especially as I will be continuing to direct with new projects. Most likely will continue to direct my own stuff. So I'll be writing that stuff, and whether or not I do that through a development deal through a studio or not is a different story. But I mean, to me, I have another spec I want to start writing, but it is tougher now where it's it gets pushed back a little bit because of the assignment work and everything else. It's much easier to just work on the stuff you're getting paid to work on than the stuff you're not. And so that is the case. But we'll see. I mean, we'll see if it ultimately changes where I can just say, hey, I have an idea, and someone goes, great, we'll just pay you right off the bat to develop it. So they're never really a spec situation. Mm-hmm. But I'm fine to continue writing at least for myself to direct at this point on spec. Sure.
So have you moved back to Los Angeles?
No.
So you're still in Rhode Island?
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
I've been able to do that, even to say from with TV stuff that I've been involved in and everything else. I've been fortunate enough to be able to just travel out as needed and do Skype calls as needed and phone calls.
Okay, yeah. I get a lot of questions from people. Do I really have to move to Los Angeles? And my advice always is yes, you should move to Los Angeles. But you're a good example of someone who's made it work by not being there.
Well, I mean, I think it depends. I think it depends. Obviously, I get that question a lot. I think it depends more on where you are in life, kind of like I was saying before. If you are just out of college and you want to get in this industry, so you don't have any real attachment, you could do whatever the hell you don't have a wife or a husband, you don't have a kid, you don't have a mortgage, any of those things, you should move to Los Angeles. You should go and you should try to get a job either interning or working at a studio or a production company or whatever else, because that's the way you make contacts. That just gives you access. That's what people like me didn't have for years, because that's not the route that I took. So I think 100% that person should move to LA. But for someone that, it's a lot trickier than that. Yes, of course, there's a benefit to being in LA because just you make contacts almost by osmosis, right? Or just like you bump into someone at a party and that leads to a contact. it's easier. But I don't know. I think being far away has its advantages too, because you're not wrapped up in that world all the time. My life is a very normal, regular world in Rhode Island, and it allows me to stay separate from when I'm in LA. It's just like I barely get any writing done when I'm in LA because there's so much going on. That's between meetings and everything else. It just kind of, I don't know. There's a good headspace being out of that bubble.
Yeah, sure. How often do you have to come into LA? Like, what percentage of your time are you in LA?
More than usual lately. I mean, naturally, I shot my movie in LA, so I was there last summer for pretty much the whole summer. And I usually go out like 4 or 5 times a year, 6 times a year regularly, and then whatever may pop up in between.
Okay. Good. So, is there anything you wished you knew? Is this kind of as we wrap things up? Is there anything that you wished you knew when you started out that you know now? Some sort of wisdom you can impart on people who are listening to this?
Yes. And that is to realize that even though it's kind of like behind the hooray for Hollywood, cool, almost like seemingly unreachable thing that's there, right? It's just a business, and it's a business comprised of human beings. So, and I say that because I think there's this, like I said, there's kind of like this thing we have about Hollywood. It's almost like it's I can't articulate it for some reason, but it seems different, right? It seems so different than what we're used to in everyday life. But it's not. It's still people just going to their jobs, and they still have the same day-to-day sort of things going on that you have. Instead of going to their small marketing or advertising agency in Iowa and talking about the new account about the local grocery store that the line that they're developing for them, they're going in and they're discussing the promotion of a big Hollywood movie. But it's still the same process of people going to work and dropping their kids off at daycare and doing this, and it's the same. And so you say, well, what's the point of mentioning all that? It's because so you don't feel A, intimidated by it all, or B, the flip is that you don't approach it any differently than you would any job you've ever gone after. You don't think it requires any less or less attention or less sort of you have to be understanding of people's time in the same way you wouldn't be overbearing with people that you're going for a job at the bank. Like, you wouldn't follow up on your resume every day with a call saying, hey, I sent my resume, did you get it? And they're like, you've been calling every day. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, I think people sometimes get that way with this industry, not realizing these other people on the end of the phone also have not just jobs, but they have lives, right? They have their kids to then pick up from daycare and all these other things. And so it's an abstract sort of thing to kind of end with, but at the same time, I think it's hugely important because it'll help you. It would have for me kind of put me a little more at ease, like even making those difficult phone calls and everything else in the past. You're so nervous because you think like it's almost like you're reaching out to a different dimension, but you're not. I mean, this was a big eye-opening thing for me. The first time I ever had meetings where you're sitting across from people and they're just like, they're dressed like this, they're about your age. And you're like, wow, I thought there was going to be like all these, these guys in suits and women in suits and they've got all these notepads and they're all staring at me. It's not really that, especially at the earlier stages of it.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you, Chris. You've been very generous with your time. I really do appreciate your coming on the show. Is there a good way for people to, just follow you? Do you have a blog or a Twitter account? Maybe people can hook up with you?
I have a Twitter account, yeah. I'm at Chris Sparling, so it's at ChrisSparling.
Okay, perfect. I will link to that in the show notes so people can go directly there. So, Chris, once again, I really do appreciate it. It's been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
If you're looking for an in-depth analysis of your screenplay by an industry professional, I work with several consultants. Check out sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. All the consultants listed on that page have years of experience actually working in the entertainment industry. Right now, we have a real working producer who will give you notes on your script and 2 screenwriters with actual screenwriting credits. These guys are real pros. They're not gurus or professional consultants. These are guys who actually work in the business. So if you're looking for some high quality notes on your current screenplay, check out sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Once again, I want to thank Screencraft for sponsoring this episode. They're currently accepting submissions for their comedy screenplay contest. They have a great lineup of judges for the comedy contest, some of the best comedy producers in the business. The deadline for entry is August 1st. Check out screencraft.org if you have a comedy screenplay that you'd like to enter. In the next episode of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Babs Batella. She's an agent at the Silver Batella Agency. She offers some great tips for writers who are looking for an agent, so keep an eye out for that episode. In today's Writing Words segment, I want to reflect a bit on Chris's story. I get a lot of emails from people asking if they have to move to Los Angeles to be a successful screenwriter. Chris is living proof that you don't have to. I still maintain that you increase your chances of success by moving to Los Angeles, but it's clearly possible to succeed even from the other side of the country. But I would like to point out that even though Chris wasn't living in LA, he was constantly working on stuff. He was writing scripts, he was sending them out to the few contacts he had, and ultimately he was preparing to shoot a second feature film. So it might be debatable how much living in LA helps you or not, but what's not debatable, and this goes for everyone, whether you live in LA or not, is that you've got to constantly be working on stuff and getting stuff out there at whatever level you're at. Nothing is going to slow your career down like inactivity. Good things can happen if you constantly put yourself out there. And for screenwriters, that means writing new screenplays and perhaps even shooting your own feature film. Whatever you do, just keep plugging away. Anyway, I hope you found this episode inspiring and have gotten some value out of it. That's our show. Thanks for listening.